Today I'm gonna show you the 2 times I pierced my own septum. You might have seen me do this once before, so I have in fact pierced my septum a total of 3 times at this point. I explained some of the reasons why in my previous videos, but if you're new to my channel, I thought I'd just mention the background a bit first, just to explain why. I feel like I was quite lucky with my first attempt. It turned out really great. It's just that I have a very high placed sweet spot, so the placement was perfect for rings and clickers. But for pinchers and septum spikes, it really didn't work out, just because of my anatomy and how my nostrils are shaped, I guess. It was just too high up in my nose to have space for that kind of jewelry. So that's why I decided to pierce my septum a second time. Some mistakes were made along the way, so that's why I pierced it twice. Technically the second and third time. And that's what we're watching today. I'm just gonna go through the clips on my phone, but you'll see them here on the screen, and I'll just talk through them and just show you what I did. There were also some obstacles along the way for both of the attempts, so it definitely was a bumpy ride. And as you can maybe see from this video, I'm already wearing my 6mm or 2 gauge septum spike, so I'm already done stretching and everything. It's been a while since I pierced my septum, not that long ago honestly, but my first try was in September, and then I did the second in October. Just for reference if you're curious, because I bet I'm gonna get some questions about that. I don't want to get into too much details in this video, because I just want to really show the piercing process, and then I'm gonna make some other videos later on where I talk about the actual stretching period. I guess I'll show you some of the stuff that I used the first time, because I did use different equipment for both of my attempts. So I had these barrel clamps from the first time that I pierced my septum. They look like this. And I did use a larger needle just because I knew that I was stretching big, so I thought why not start with a larger sized than normal, just to get a heads up sort of. So I used a 2mm needle this time, or a 12 gauge. And I just want to show you in comparison to a sort of regular piercing needle. This is 1.2, so quite a substantial difference right there. And for my initial jewelry, I went for a straight bar. I didn't want to put any circular things in there, because this piercing was specifically for straight septum spikes. So to keep the piercing hole like as straight as possible, I just went with a steel bar in the same size as the needle, 2mm, but it does have these externally threaded ends, which really comes in handy because it fits into the needle, so it makes for an easy transition when you don't have catheter needles. And because of the larger size of the bar, the smallest ball ends that they came with were, I think, 6mm, which look like this. And as you can see, they're huge. Obviously I did not put those on. I just simply wore this bar, and it did keep in place without them. So now let's finally take a look at my first attempt at re-piercing my septum. So there I am, very happy and excited to be there. Not. And I inserted several, I think, of these clips of me just putting on the barrel clamp, because I probably did that like a million times just to make sure it was on there correctly. And I was trying to put it in the very middle of my septum, and you can see me like wiggle it under my nose just to make sure that I wasn't on top of the cartilage. And I had, I think, 3 different mirrors, like one in front, one on the side, and one below me, just to kind of check all angles. But when it's your own septum and you're holding the clamp and everything in front of your face, it's honestly really hard to see what you're doing. So it didn't really help that much. And I don't know if you noticed that small like adjustment I did, like pushing the needle up and down. So what happened was that when I stuck the needle in, it suddenly stopped. And I think what happened was that I hit like the middle part where the 2 barrels meet. So I had to slightly adjust the needle and find out what kind of direction I had to angle the needle to go through the barrel again. So that was not great, but eventually we got there. Then just removing the clamps and trying to look at it. And I think my face there was more like this is still too high and not like this is too crooked. That was my biggest concern. After that, I'm just putting on a lot of coconut oil on the needle, just so there's not too much friction while pulling it through. And then trying to line up the jewelry with my shaky hands. And lining these up can be a nightmare, and I'm just nervous about it because if you lose either the needle or the jewelry and you lose that transition, you're basically fucked and you'd have to do it all over again. So there it is. Trying to look at it, still shaky, does look quite crooked and it's still very high up in my nose, so yeah, whatever. So all in all, not too bad. Some minor mishaps with the barrel clamps. One thing I noticed, and I think the reason why it turned out still super high in my nose, is how the barrel clamps are shaped. So if you see right under the barrels where this part is like bent under it, when you put this inside your nose, your nostrils kind of make room for that. But since I wanted to pierce it quite low, the bottom part of my nose, like the actual septum, was kind of in the way. These were kind of like squishing on my actual septum and making it hard to like really close. And I think that's maybe also why it was hitting the middle when I went in with the needle, because I couldn't like close these completely. So the barrel clamps were honestly not great for the type of positioning that I was going for. I did also notice that it was slightly crooked because it's really hard to get straight. Yeah, basically I wasn't happy with it for obvious reasons. So I waited 2 days, I think, before I took it out and knew that I had to just redo it all over again. Definitely because it was quite crooked, but the main reason was still that it was just too high for where I wanted it to be. Because even with just that small bar, it was still kind of placed really close to my nostrils on top. And it just wouldn't have worked out with stretching for a larger jewelry. So I knew that it had to be placed even lower. So I just took it out, let it heal, and then about a month later I did my second attempt. So for my second attempt I went with a different type of clamp. Just some forceps that look like this, with a big open space and very narrow. Felt like this was a better choice for what I was doing, and you can see more easily what you're doing and where you're placing the needle. And I was getting bolder with my choice, so I went with a 2.5 needle. This was the next largest size that they offered. Here is the smaller one in comparison. This is 2mm and then 2.5, and this is it compared to a standard 1.6 needle. I also bought their 4mm needle just in case I had to do some adjustments later on. But I definitely ended up not using that one, and yeah, I wouldn't really want to stick that in me anyways, because it is thick as hell. That's compared to the smaller needle. And then also a 2.5mm bar. And because I was using this type of new clamps, I decided to get a sterile marker because I needed some type of reference or guide to where I was gonna put the needle. So that's my first clip here. Just kind of pushing my nose back and making sure that I'm not putting it too close to my face. And I really tried to put it smack down in the middle of my septum. If you see from the underside, you can kind of see where my nostrils kind of bend towards the middle. And that's where I wanted to put the needle. I'm also aware that my line on top of the septum wasn't completely straight, but I knew that the point on each side were. So even though the line between was a bit wavy, it doesn't really matter as long as your 2 points are at the same angle, because then when you put the needle through, it's going to be straight no matter what, if that makes sense. So here we are for the second time, or technically the third, with a marked out nose and new clamps. Here I decided to test with just turning the needle around and checking with the flat back of the needle against my finger, just to touch and see if I had space under my cartilage, and just making sure that it was below it. Did that on both sides, still putting on the clamps like a million times and checking everything, trying to make it as straight as possible, slightly pulling it down, also just to make sure that I'm not on top of the cartilage, trying to wriggle it a little bit, just to check that it's nice and loose. Going in with the 2.5 needle, it does look quite thick. You can kind of see the squinting of the eye when the needle hits. And then hopefully you can notice that here I'm having some issues. You can kind of see the white part of the skin coming out on the left side. For some reason, it was just really hard for me to push the needle through, and it just wouldn't happen. I pushed and still it wouldn't just come out the other side. So here I was just struggling and putting as much force as I could. You can maybe see how much I'm pushing. I don't know, I'm trying to be as careful as I can, obviously, so that it's still straight. But I was pushing for my life. And there it finally popped. And I got it through. Going in for some coconut oil again. This time I was just I was so nervous about not getting the needle through, and I was just slapping it on there, dripping all over the place. Just drenching it in coconut oil to get the needle through, because it was still kind of hard to push the rest of the needle through. There was a lot of resistance. Then going in with the bar, pushing it. I was kind of scared that the needle would just drop onto my lap or the floor next to me because of not having the barrel clamps there to kind of hold it in place. But the threaded end actually held on to the needle quite well, so I was able to catch it after I put the jewelry through. And then I had to just push it slightly more in, so the jewelry was secure in there. The aftermath does look kind of messy and awful, but all that wet stuff on my face is just all of the coconut oil I put there, and the coconut oil kind of dissolves the ink, so the ink got on my lips and everything. I thought the placement was really good. It's definitely in the spot where I wanted it, in the middle. Maybe not 100% straight, but it's kind of hard to tell, and you won't really know until it's healed anyways. And that was my second attempt. So I did have a hard time with the needle going through. And I know that it might look like I was going through cartilage, but I'm 99% sure that I didn't. One of the reasons being that going through that cartilage with a big needle like that would definitely not feel great. But I could honestly not feel it at all. I know this second time piercing it looked way worse than my first attempt, because my first attempt was a lot quicker. But honestly, pain-wise, the first time was way more juicy than the second time. The second time did not hurt at all, even though I had to push like crazy, but I didn't feel it for some reason. The first attempt, I would put on a scale maybe a 5 on a pain scale, while the second one I would maybe put at a 2. And another big reason I don't think it's cartilage is because I was able to stretch it so fast afterwards. Stretching cartilage is really, really hard, if doable at all, but I had no trouble with stretching, and I stretched from 2.5mm and all the way up to 6mm in just a month. So it definitely was not through the cartilage. So what I think was the reason for the needle not going through was scar tissue from the first attempt. So because my first attempt was crooked, it was kind of angled downwards, I guess. When I went in with the needle the second time, it probably went easily through this part, but then because I had pierced it at an angle here, it would hit the scar tissue here, making it really hard and tough to go through the left side of my nose. That is my theory, at least. Other than that though, I was really happy with the second attempt. I got the placement that I wanted. It was definitely low enough to where I had room for stretching and to fit larger jewelry. And then I let that heal for another month at least, 4 to 6 weeks maybe, before I started stretching. But yeah, after that it definitely looked really straight and just perfect, and I was really happy with the result. Took a while to get there, but definitely worth it in the end for me. And yeah, that's basically what I wanted to show you today. Like I said, I will definitely make more videos talking more about the actual stretching process, what type of jewelry I wore while stretching, and also talking about the taping method that I used. So remember to subscribe if you aren't already, so you won't miss out on my new videos. As always, a huge thank you to my one patron, Elliot. You can join my Patreon and get early access for all my new videos coming out. You can also check my Instagram for more pictures of septum related content and other stuff. And then I hope to see you in my next video. Vi ses!